Hi guys. So we're gonna do the very last thing that will be on your test. And this is actually the last thing you're gonna learn in math at enunciation. So it's kind of crazy, very last thing you're gonna learn until high school. And we're picking a biggie. So what I did is I went ahead and I just reviewed the methods to solve a quadratic equation. And the very first thing we learned was just taking the square root of both sides if it's a perfect square. Sometimes they factor, and you can use that, which is your most recent homework. You can complete the square, and completing the square will always work, whereas factoring only works if it's factorable. And you can't take the square root unless it's a perfect square. But completing the square always works. And then there's the last method, which is the quadratic formula, and this always works as well. The interesting thing is, well, I'll show you in just a second where this comes from. Completing the square and the quadratic formula are actually the same thing. The quadratic formula is sort of a shortcut method of completing the square. You might not think it's a shortcut, but it actually is. So for any quadratic equation, let's go ahead and write it out. The general form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And if this were equals y, let's say, then if you were to graph it, they look like, in a general sense, they look like that, called parabolas. But they have this a, b, and c. And that a, b, and c are going to be what you're going to plug into the quadratic formula. Now here's the formula. It goes negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. And this is what x equals. Remember, this x means x-intercept. And I'll put an S there because most of the time there's two of them, and that's where this plus minus comes from, because it's kind of like it gives you two options for your x. All right, this, here, I'm going to go ahead and circle this. Very big, important formula. I'm not going to derive this formula for you. If we had more time, I would. But I just want to show you where it comes from. If I were to take this equation without any numbers in it, just the a, b, c, just leave it as a, b, c. And let's say I throw the c on the other side, make it negative c on the right, and I complete the square with it, just using the a, b, and c. Then this is what I did last year. So if I start with this, and I complete the square, it's kind of hard to see here. Let's see. There's not much room, but let me move this over. See how I'm adding something square to both sides? You get a square, you get all this mess over here, you take the square root of both sides, you put this piece on the other side, blah, 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 and voila, you get to the quadratic formula. So this is completing the square, kind of condensed and packed into one formula. And that's why they both work all the time, because they're really the same thing. All right, that's enough of that. Now we're not going to worry about that. Let's just see how it works. I'm going to start off using a really easy example. And it's one that, if I can find my paper, oh, here. Yeah, I want to do one that's factorable, so we know what the answer is going to end up being. So we want to solve x squared minus 4x minus 21 using the quadratic formula. Now, if it factors and you had a choice, of course you would solve this by factoring. And this equals 0. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you what it should be, which you could figure out yourself. 3, 7 minus plus. the answer should be -3 and 7. Those would be my x-intercepts. Now we're going to use it with the formula. So the first thing you should do, and you should be really careful about this part, is identify your A, B, C. A is the number in front of the x squared. There's an invisible 1 here, so I'm going to list out my A is 1. B is the number that's attached to the x, not the square, just the x. So my B is -4. And then your C is just the number, but notice everything's on the left side. It has to equal 0. So C would be a -21. Then all you have to do is plug them in. Negative, be careful here. Be careful at B. It's going to be a -4, right? Because there's a negative in the formula, and then B itself is negative. Plus, minus, the square root. The critical area is right in here, right in the square root. It's this value that's going to tell you how many solutions you have. But let's just go ahead and plug it in. Now, I always use parentheses. It's something squared minus 4 times A times C. I strongly recommend, as a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you to do this because when people don't do this, they mess the signs up. So, B, -4. A, +1. C, -21, all in parentheses. Divided by 2 times 1, my 2A. Now this is what x is going to be, or the x is, plural. It depends on what calculator you use. If you use the little handwriting one, you could actually just write it neatly in there. I don't think you can put a plus minus. You probably have to put a plus on one and then a minus on the other one. But I use this calculator. You know what I think what I would do? Instead of trying to type it all in, because it's easy to mess that up, you might just simplify it first, but you have to be really careful. So here, let's do 4 positive plus or minus. -4 squared is +16. That's one of the places people mess up. And then minus, I don't know if you should simplify this or not. You know what I think you should do? Here's what I would do. I'm going to recommend, I'm trying to figure out the way that you could do it to minimize errors. I would just first type in yellow part right under the square root in calculator. All right, so let's just get rid of my 16 there. And I'm going to use it with the parentheses. -4, boom, squared. There we go, that looks better. Now I can't see though. -4. And you could just do that times 1, -2100. Just type it in and then put that here. All over 2 times 1 is 2. So do this on the calculator, but type it in exactly like that. It's just trust me. All right, now simplifying, x equals 4 plus or minus square root of 100 is going to be a 10 all over 2. And if you can, so if you get down to this spot here, you could either branch off in 2 different directions. Yeah, I think we'll just do it. Let's find our 2 answers. So do the plus one first. 4 plus 10 is 14 halves, or 7. So that's one of them. And then 4 minus 10 is going to be negative 6 halves, or negative 3. And there, see, we've got our two numbers. So your answers are x equals negative 3 and 7. Now, graphing this, negative 3, 7, and it goes like that. Okay, that is all of 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop it right there for a minute. Continue.